Mom and pop purchase.
I have to work with my mom and dad?
Mergers and acquisitions.
I love it when you talk dirty to me.
I'm sorry. I couldn't help it. I can't even picture Steve saying that.
Welcome to another episode of Attorneys Are Human Too. We've started season 4, and this is a great episode. It's called The Art of the Deal. I'm Steve Wallace.
And I'm Selena Music.
So today we're going to talk about many war stories that we have in relation to representing buyers and sellers of businesses. The businesses that we're talking about are not publicly traded. We're not going to talk about somebody buying Apple or Microsoft. We're going to talk about, a mom and pop business, even a larger scale business, up to probably $15 or $20 million, anywhere from $100,000 to $15 or $20 million. And we have a lot of people that come to us and they really have no idea where to start other than, I want to own a business. I know if I own a business, it's my ticket to prosperity.
Correct. And I think they associate it with having a commercial space. I think that's kind of like, because nowadays you can have a business from home, but
that's what I like. That COVID taught us a lot of things. And one of them is you don't necessarily need very large office space.
Correct. But for some people, they feel like they've made it if they actually have a space.
Okay. So let's get right into it then. We'll give you an example, and we're going to use a hypothetical because lawyers love to use hypotheticals.
Oh, lawyers. And
soon you will learn what the word of the day is. I haven't shared it with everybody yet. So we have Mr. and Mrs. Ramos, let's just say that, are looking to buy a cafeteria in Hialeah. Oh. And so they meet the owner of the cafeteria in Hialeah. And we're going to walk through the different steps that they need to take so they'll be successful and they'll protect it. So in this particular scenario, we are representing the buyer of the business.
Okay.
And so oftentimes, because it's Hialeah, they'll come to you first versus me because you're fluent in Spanish. So what do Mr. and Mrs. Ramos tell you first?
They're going to tell me, oye, mami, yo quiero comprar una cafetería y dile al abogado ese que me ayude.
And for those of us that aren't fluent in Spanish, can you translate that for us?
They're going to say, hey, I want to buy this cafeteria and I need that attorney to help me out because I don't know what I'm doing.
Okay, great. So one of the first things that we do is ultimately, if they're not represented, because realtors in Florida are also licensed to buy and sell businesses. So they can get a commission for representing a buyer and seller of a business.
Correct.
And the scary part about it is oftentimes a lot of real estate agents can't even spell the word business and they're representing people buying it. And when it comes to a business, there has to be some financial acumen, some accounting and the like. So oftentimes the first thing that we ask the clients to do, we sometimes get involved in negotiating the business terms, but ultimately most times people come to us and they say, we've negotiated a price to buy the business.
Correct.
So what generally we ask them to do, and we like to do this to start, is we draft a letter of intent. And a letter of intent basically outlines all of the business terms, the purchase price, if there's a deposit, if all the money is going to be paid at closing, or the seller may hold a seller-held financing for a certain time period. It would outline if there's any non-competes, meaning that the seller of the business can't go and open a cafeteria across the street from the business that's being bought, how long the seller will stay on to transition the business, and then what the closing date is. These are the major business terms.
So it's almost like the contract on a residential.
Yes and no, because the letter of intent is not a binding letter of intent unless you put certain language in there that makes certain provisions in the letter of intent binding. And there's a whole volume of cases that outline whether or not a letter of intent is binding or not. I generally try to outline the business terms, make them, for all intents and purposes, non-binding until the parties execute a contract. But at least with a letter of intent, it gives me framework to start drafting the contract.
Correct. Okay. And that's good to know, because a lot of people don't understand why that is needed. And from my experience, people just want to get to the contract, and they're rushing, and they're like, hey, well, where's the contract? I want to buy this already. I want to close this already. And they don't understand, like, we're doing certain things to protect you as the buyer.
Absolutely. And then oftentimes buyers come to us and they may not have looked behind the curtain of the business, or maybe have not even visited the location, or maybe haven't spent substantial amounts of time at the business. And so oftentimes based on that, we may put in an inspection or due diligence period, just like in a residential contract, where you have a certain time frame to review the business records, maybe do some site visits, maybe interview some staff. And if any time during that due diligence period you don't like what you see, you can always terminate the contract.
Correct. You know why it kind of, like, it makes sense to me, but to the buyer, and I think it's because a lot of times they're being guided by the realtor, right? And the realtor is saying, listen, if we don't get this under contract ASAP, you're going to lose this property. So what's the time frame that this can get done?
Well, a letter of intent can be done pretty quickly. Also, there's a trade association of business brokers. It's called BBF, the Business Brokers of Florida, and they have a form contract that they use. And oftentimes, like if a business broker refers us a closing, it's already executed. There are certain things in there that I'm not in love with. So oftentimes I may get that, and I may do an addendum to the contract. The best situation for us, just because if I'm involved and you're involved, early on during the negotiations, we can draft a proper contract, because one of the things that's also important to understand is what's the framework of the transaction, because there's generally, when you're doing any type of buying or selling of a business, there's really 3 legal formats that the transaction can occur. Okay. One format is called an asset purchase agreement, which basically, if Selena, you have a company and I have a company, you're just selling me all the assets of the business. I'm not taking over your existing corporation or existing LLC. I'm just purchasing the business in my new, fresh, clean entity.
Correct. That makes sense to me. Because I mean, I can see it both ways, but it makes sense to me because you never know what the other person had, tax liabilities. I don't know. I get scared.
And that's a very good point, because most of the time, if a client comes to me and says, I want to buy a business, they don't know the legal format or framework to do that. And my preferred method is to do an asset purchase, because you're not buying any of the debt, theoretically, unless the contract provides that you're assuming some of the liabilities. You're getting all of the assets free and clear of any liens. And that's the preferred way of doing it. When I'm talking about liens, I'm talking about any debt or liability associated.
Liens, SBA loans.
Right, that's right.
Et cetera, et cetera. But what happens when a person says, no, I really want to buy the name, because the name is what makes the business.
Okay,
I mean, and that happens.
Yeah, well, oftentimes part of the assets are the trade name, which would be like, Mamacita's Cafeteria of Hialeah.
Or McDonald's.
Probably not that one. I don't think you'd be able to buy that one. Maybe McDowell's, but not McDonald's.
Oh, my God.
So that's the preferred method. But along those lines, to answer your question, it's not just the hard assets of the business. It's not the pots and pans, all of the equipment, the ovens. You're also buying, and this is a term of art, and this is going to be our word of the day, intellectual property.
Ooh, fancy.
It's very fancy. So basically what intellectual property is any of your intangible assets. That'll be a future word of the day, intangible. But ultimately, it would be the trade name of the business, any websites, phone numbers, social media accounts, logos, trademarks, any other type of goodwill associated with the business. All of that is intellectual property. It falls under that auspice. And, as if we're just talking about a restaurant, there's not any other intellectual property. But if we're talking about a technology company, oftentimes there could be a patent.
Yes.
And so patents are something that is very, very valuable. And during the technology boom over the years, up and down, I'm kind of an old man, so I've seen a lot of ups and downs with technology. And so usually when we're talking about a technology business, the major asset would be a patent, or it would be, a website,
Correct.
a social media account.
Patent for software
Right.
and things like
and
that.
Instagram account, those kinds of things. So, and we see, especially with, your generation, the TikTok generation, we see a lot of intellectual property.
I am not a TikToker.
Intellectual property.
But then,
where the most viable or most valuable asset would be an Instagram account or a TikTok account. I mean, I love what's his name, AJ and Big Justice. I love those two. And like that guy was like slinging mortgages, and all of a sudden he's like a multimillionaire. So just based on a silly video. So videos, other content, that's also intellectual property that people are buying. So back to our cafeteria in Hialeah.
okay.
So we have the parties, and they finalized the letter of intent.
Okay.
One of the things that we see in most small businesses is that they don't own real estate, unlike a lot of other transactions that we do. So one of the challenges that we have a lot of times, and why we need to put contingencies in place, and I'm actually working on a med spa deal right now where the assignment of the lease is the biggest thing. And I'm talking about assignment of lease. For the most part, if you're dealing in a retail business or a restaurant, or even in an industrial business, one of the other viable assets other than intellectual property is the location. Because as we say, location for businesses
It's everything.
is everything. So for example, let's say the owners of the cafeteria stop paying their landlord, and they lose the location. That business is worthless for all intents and purposes.
Correct, because in this scenario, they're buying the assets.
Right.
Okay, they're starting their business in there, but they don't own the actual space.
That's
they don't
correct.
own the commercial space.
Right.
Now, what happens if they wanted to buy that commercial space?
Well, generally speaking, you'd have to, the landlord, and oftentimes if we're there's different concepts of real estate. So if it's a single building where the restaurant is the entire building, that may be an option. They would have to contact the landlord, but that would be a separate transaction.
Okay.
So ultimately what happens, let's assume that they're not able to buy the location of the business. They have to apply for an assignment of lease. That's the term of art, where basically the tenant of the lease goes from the seller's entity and it's transferred into the buyer's entity.
Got it.
And so oftentimes what happens is the landlord has to evaluate what the financial strength is of the buyer. And if you remember, we did that we had a client that was going to buy a deli in West Palm.
Yes.
And the deal fell apart because the landlord
wouldn't assign the lease.
assign the lease without a major capital contribution.
Which is that allowed? Because the sale is between two parties. So can the landlord say, "Listen, I want $20,000 for myself if you want me to assign this lease"? Like, is that a thing?
It's pretty common actually, because remember, they don't own the real estate. So when we're writing, now we're moving to the contract. One of the things that we put in the contract, we put, assuming that they passed the due diligence period. The other thing that we put in a contract, which is very important, is we make the sale of the business contingent
To the assignment of the lease.
That's correct.
Bingo.
And so that deal that we were talking about, remember, we entered into the contract, and then our buyer terminated the contract based on the fact that the landlord wouldn't assign the lease.
Correct. And yeah, I remember that deal. But, initially he said, I'll take X amount, and then it kept increasing and increasing. But that sucks, because then as a seller, you're trapped in a situation where you can't really sell your business because, the landlord's not going to assign it.
That's correct.
And sometimes the contribution they're asking for is ridiculous.
Right, but he who owns the real estate or she who owns the real estate makes the rules.
Okay, interesting. So if I was Ramos, I wouldn't buy a cafeteria unless I'm buying the real estate as well.
Well, but if you're able to assign lease, remember, it's the location.
Correct.
People that are going for Cuban food, they don't say, well, I like Mamacita's Cafe in Hialeah because Joe Smith owns the real estate. I just want to eat
Correct.
Cuban food.
Correct.
So people don't know the difference. This is just the nitty gritty that business lawyers like ourselves, we know to look for in a contract.
Got it.
One other contingency that we oftentimes see in a contract, now we're going to shift the focus of the business. So Mamacita's Cafeteria, they didn't close on that because the landlord wouldn't assign the lease. So now we're going to a different transaction.
Okay.
So now we're representing a buyer who is buying a medical practice.
Okay.
So we have Dr. X and Dr. Y are teaming up together to buy Dr. G's medical practice.
Okay.
In Pembroke Pines.
Okay. Dr. G's a real doctor, just saying.
Right. Okay, not Dr. G. We're going to slice through that. Dr. X, Y, and Z.
Okay.
Okay? So we enter into a contract. So under this particular scenario, oftentimes when we're dealing with heavily regulated industries, we oftentimes, unless we're doing like a different type of transaction, which we'll talk about, oftentimes we would do a stock purchase deal, which is a little different. So we would buy the entity. We would have the parties like Dr. Y and Dr. Z would buy Dr. XYZ's practice, but instead of buying the assets of the business, they would buy the stock.
Okay.
And the reason why is because oftentimes it's very difficult to go to the Department of Health and transfer licenses.
Okay. So they're basically keeping the licenses that are in play.
Right. They're buying the stock. So Dr. Y and Dr. Z, instead of buying the assets, Dr. Y and Dr. Z are going to buy Dr. G's shares in Dr. X, Y, and Z. So what's happening is the business name is not changing. The business entity isn't changing. What's happening is they're buying the shares of stock. So just what we talked about earlier, where we were concerned about overtaking all of the liabilities, they are not only buying the assets of the business, they're assuming all the liabilities because the shares of the business carry the assets and the liabilities with them.
Okay. So those require a lot more research, a lot more time. But can you do that if it's okay? Because we're talking medical, but can you do that for someone who's trying to buy, let's say, a club and they want to get those liquor licenses?
Right. And that's another scenario. That's actually an excellent point. That's another scenario where oftentimes we buy the shares of the business. Now, what happens is with that, the entity still owns the entity, no change in the entity. What we have to do in that particular scenario when we're talking about a liquor license, which is another heavily regulated industry.
Correct. And hard to get those liquor licenses. They're pricey.
Right. Then it's called a 4COP, and we've done those deals before in Miami and in Broward, and there's a very limited number of those licenses. And when we're talking about 4COP, we're talking about beer, wine, tequila, everything involved in it. And so in that scenario also, we would do a stock purchase deal. Now, a stock purchase deal is a lot more complicated because you're taking everything associated with business, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So in a stock purchase deal, under no circumstances would I allow my client to just sign a contract and take it over. We need a certain time period for due diligence to go in because there's a variety of different reps and warranties, which is basically the seller saying, this is true, and not only is it true, I guarantee it's true.
Okay.
And so stock purchase deals, and oftentimes in asset purchase deals also, when we're looking at asset purchase deals, we're always worried that something is going to come up with the seller that's going to attach a lien to the assets because we always want to buy assets without any liens, or at least know.
Want them to be clean.
Right. Free and clear of all liens and nice and clean and clear. So a stock purchase, you take everything.
The good, the bad, and the ugly.
The good, the bad, and the ugly. And ultimately,
it's got to be lucrative then, though.
Well, it's got to be worthwhile. And the reason why we're doing this is there's a reason. There's a license that we need that's hard to get if we transfer it from one entity to another.
Correct.
And so under your liquor license scenario, all we have to do is change the principles. We have to go to the Department of, I think it's, what is it? They keep changing the name of it, but let's just call it the Department of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, because that's what it is in Florida. Mm-hmm. And we go there and we just apply a change of principles, and they just do a quick background check.
Okay.
Now, the problem is, and we've encountered this before, oftentimes, surprise, surprise, it's South Florida. As farther south we get, the crazier it gets. Oftentimes, a principal could be a felon. You can't be a felon and own a license in Florida for the most part. Mm. So we usually have people that are behind the scenes. We always see the behind the scenes scenario.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, stock purchase deals, there's reasons for it. It's not our preferred method. And then oftentimes now the third scenario would be a merger. So basically what happens, and there's a variety of different tax reasons to do it and not do it.
Okay.
This is another scenario where if there's a license involved, a merger is a possibility. So, and it's pretty common. I'm going to give you some examples. So in the dentistry industry, in orthodontics, a lot of private equity firms are coming in because they're looking at, there's a lot of multiples and there's a lot of potential cash flow involved. We're also seeing in engineering firms as well, where large backed companies backed by private equity firms. And for those of you who don't know private equity firms, it's these very rich Wall Street guys that leave like Goldman Sachs or, Bear Stearns or something of that nature. And then they start their own fund where they just basically go and they play golf with rich people and they get them to invest in their private equity firm.
Okay.
And so basically it's a very kind of shrouded, secretive industry.
Can you break that merger down a little bit more for our listeners? Like, are they stepping in and saying, hey, Joe, we're going to give you $2 million, but we get to keep, 80% of your profits?
Well,
is that how it works?
I mean, that's a way to do it where the seller would remain with the company, because that's oftentimes, especially when we're talking about engineering firms, accounting firms, we're seeing it also law firms to a degree.
Correct. Some people are just the face.
Right. And so they'll stay on and you'll get a deal. But for all intents and purposes, all of these people are employees of the larger company.
Okay.
Like we see law firm mergers. One of our old firms did actually merge into another firm. And I've been involved in companies, in law firms where they've merged.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that in the end, towards the end of the episode.
Yeah. Now,
but
are these good or bad mergers? Like, is this would you recommend this as a good business practice? Because I know if I was offered, let's say, a merger, I don't want to stay on. I want my money and I want to get out. That's
one method. At least what we see with lawyers want to die at their desk. Not myself, but it's very common that lawyers work until they're like 80s or 90s. And I never understood that, especially litigators. Like, it's stressful for every time I have to drive to West Palm or Fort Lauderdale or Miami to go to the courthouse.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm young or relatively young.
Yeah. I think it just gives them something to do.
I mean, I have a lot of plans that don't involve working as a lawyer.
Yeah.
So I guess I just have more interest.
We'll talk about that at a different episode.
Okay.
What is Steven going to do after the fact?
Fair enough. Well, I'm a creative media superstar. That's what I'm working on right now, thanks to Judge Janine and Selena as part of.
Oh my God.
And in that scenario, we would sell our intellectual property.
Yay.
Sorry, we digress.
Okay, back to the mergers. So what would you recommend?
Well, it's circumstance based, but mergers oftentimes occur when we have a larger company backed by a lot of capital, and they're just rolling different businesses up into one. And we see that a lot. Oftentimes, these private equity backed companies are basically merging into individual dental offices, individual or well-known regional offices, whatever professional type of office, and they all merge into this company with the eye down the road to going and taking the company public, meaning offering it up on the stock exchange. And in that scenario, the reason why people do that, it's not to make investors rich. What it is like somebody that was in the company wants to get out. We call it a liquidity event. So a liquidity event would be when you buy or sell a business, when you sell your business, when you get an investor to come in and take you out of the business, or when you go public on the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ.
Okay.
Those are the different scenarios. But most clients don't necessarily, at least to start, come to us looking for that. They're just looking to get into a business, get out of a business. Correct. And so a merger acquisition is generally done. It's the third scenario that we see, and there's got to be a reason for it. So to review, when we're talking about a small business, anywhere up to $5 million, asset purchases are the way to go. For the most part, that's the preferred method as a buyer. And then ultimately, for the most part, as a seller too. If there's licenses involved, then sometimes there may be a reason to do a stock purchase deal. Okay. That was the second scenario. And then if there's a big company coming in and just rolling up a bunch of different businesses to make a larger business, sometimes mergers make sense.
Okay.
And oftentimes, when we're talking about all three of these, there's a tax reason. And we're going to be talking to an accountant soon. Maybe we can ask our accounting friend what the reason is behind that. But when it gets more complicated, I usually bring in the accountants. And oftentimes it gets really, really complicated. We bring in a tax lawyer. Okay. Like I know enough about taxes to be dangerous and be petrified of the IRS.
Yeah, but not enough to be lethal.
Not enough to give any advice.
Yeah.
Other than pay your taxes.
Yeah, pay your taxes.
And we'll save Mike some commentary on that when we speak to the accountant.
So let me ask you this, because we talked about the purchases and the different types of purchases. What about lending? Because what I always hear is, there's no more commercial loans. No one wants to do commercial loans anymore. The market is like done for that.
Well, that's not really true. Oftentimes when we're talking about these business transactions, a lot, it really depends. The key term is the buyer bankable? Or it's not even just the buyer's bankable, like we'll look at their credit, look what their assets are, but you also want to see, is the business bankable? And it's very important to talk about that because people have this romantic idea of owning their own business. And oftentimes when somebody buys into an existing business, that romance becomes a nightmare very quickly. And let's
too much work, too much liability,
they didn't even know what they were getting themselves into. And we see a lot. And I'm going to talk a couple ways that, again, we can't predict the future. If we could predict the future, I'd probably still be doing this podcast, but I probably wouldn't be a lawyer, Yeah. No disrespect to that. So to answer your question, the Small Business Administration, through local banks and regional and national banks, provide SBA loans.
Yes.
And it's basically a loan, and oftentimes you only have to put 10% down, and then you can buy the SBA through their lending partners will lend the other 90%. And sometimes they'll also provide working capital, meaning some cash to keep the business going or to buy other assets, to employ people. So SBA loans are really common when it comes to buying businesses, but the only way the SBA is going to lend, because not only does SBA look at you, as I mentioned earlier, they look at the business. And this kind of takes us to the next discussion.
Yeah.
Oftentimes small businesses have, and this is obviously a practice that when we're representing sellers, strongly advise against, because it doesn't jive with tax law. So we oftentimes will see that these businesses have two sets of books or two accountings, which there's a set of books for taxes. And when you're a small business, you want to pay, the theory behind it is you want to pay as little in taxes as you can.
Correct. Which doesn't help you, though.
Our
later.
president of the United States brags that he doesn't pay $1 in taxes over the years.
Good for him.
And then you want to also have a set of books for your lenders to see, my business is doing so well, give
money.
me all these financing.
Correct.
Or if you're looking to bring investors in. So oftentimes these contradict. So the reason why I mention this is because when you're doing the due diligence and you get a tax return, you say they made $30,000. Why in the world would you pay $250,000 for a business that makes $30,000 a year? It makes no sense.
No.
And they're like, oh, well, especially with restaurants, oh, well, we have a lot of business in cash.
Okay.
Which, again, is a clear violation of tax laws.
Correct.
You have to report everything, whether it's $1 in cash or
So they say.
200,000. Well, no, not this is what we say.
Okay. So what if you're let's say a roofing company.
Okay.
And you're trying to buy a commercial space.
Okay. You're talking about real estate.
Real estate.
Right.
Yeah. To put your business in because your business does well. Mm-hmm. Okay. There's no lending. It's hard.
No, I mean, SBA, you can, with the SBA, as long as you occupy more than 51% of the space, you can get an SBA loan where it's 10% down and they'll give you a 90% loan. But you have to be bankable. Your business has to be bankable. So that goes with what we were just saying.
Yeah.
Show them, you shouldn't have two sets of books.
Correct. Show them the real books.
Now, the interesting thing is with the IRS being on the list of DOJ, will there be any enforcement agents? I mean, I know I've tried to contact the IRS for some of our bankruptcy clients, and it's really hard to get a hold of them.
Oh, yeah, they don't answer.
Right.
They're not talking to anyone.
That's true.
But they may not be here anymore.
I don't know how certain things that operate on tax dollars are going to continue to operate.
I thought, from my understanding, and I could be wrong, is eliminate the IRS and just tax everything. I think that was the model that.
But how do you collect the
here?
taxes? How do you process the payments?
Yo no sé.
That's correct. That's correct. So other things that to protect buyers.
Okay.
So we talked about a little bit earlier a non-compete agreement.
Yeah. Very important.
Now it's semi-controversial because certain states don't even enforce them. The Biden administration, through the FTC, put out advice saying that they're not enforcing them. They're not enforceable. Now, the new administration has taken a different position. A non-compete agreement is the key to protecting a buyer, in my opinion.
And the success of that business.
Because the last thing you want to do is have your buyer pay $1 million to a business and they open up a competing business across the street.
Yeah, or next door.
That's just not fair. And with non-competes, Florida does enforce non-compete agreements, but it had the term of art is time, location, and restriction. What do I mean by that? I mean, it has to be a reasonable time. And case law is very fact specific related to it. And it's also industry specific, meaning, law firms. The beautiful thing about it is lawyers wrote the laws. There's no such thing as a non-compete with lawyers.
Okay.
And so that's beautiful. Medical doctors do have non-competes. Sales agents, as they should. But why don't we do it? Why don't we? You know why? Because we write the laws.
That's baloney.
Well, no, the theory behind it actually is that everybody has a right to a lawyer, so you shouldn't restrict it.
Yeah.
But
and you have to shop around, too.
But think about it. Shouldn't everybody have the right to see a doctor?
Yes.
I'd much rather live than sue somebody. That's just my own occasion. That's my own thought process behind it.
Well, I see that. Okay.
So, and then also time, and then usually it's a mile radius. It could be 10 miles from location, not in Palm Beach County.
Should be like 5 miles.
No, I mean, it's fact specific. It just depends upon what the business is to determine what the restriction would be.
So what about if you are a high level tech company? What about, NDAs?
Well, NDAs are generally, well, good point. So when it comes to the non-compete, I'm using that term broadly because I usually include in there a confidentiality provision.
Okay.
You can't have access to the IP that you were subject to. You can't have access. This is so important. You can't have access to customer lists. I'm dealing with a transaction right now where my client's buying a brick and mortar business, but they also run an online business. And so we're going back and forth on how to properly negotiate a proper non-compete provision related to it, because they could buy the business, which basically they're basically assuming all this liability. There's rent,
Yeah.
there's equipment leases,
Yeah.
and then the online business has no debt other than whatever the infrastructure is for their servers and the like. But it's a lot less expensive than equipment leases and
Correct.
real estate leases. So what happens is my client could spend all this money and then lose all their customers to an online business. So it's very tricky when it comes to negotiating those types of things and properly drafting them. But if you learned anything today, do your due diligence.
Yeah. Very important.
And
but then that's something that the buyer needs to do.
That's right. So that's a good point. So
because buyers think we're going to do it.
right. So what do we do? What if they hire us? We obviously draft the contract. We prepare the closing documents.
Letter of intent.
We review any of the legal documents. But what we don't do is we don't review financials. That's not what we do.
No.
What we do is hire a forensic accountant.
Yes.
That's what we do.
And we're not the inspectors either.
We are not. We don't provide any physical inspection. We provide them with information. You need to get an inspector. We won't refer physical inspectors.
No.
The other thing, which is something important for due diligence, is to get a business valuation, which is an appraisal, but of businesses.
Okay.
And so those.
And how can they get those?
I mean,
where do they go?
There's business valuation experts all over the place. A lot of them are CPAs or financial planners. I mean, there's a different set of licenses that you have to be a business valuation expert. But we always recommend that because we can't comment and we don't comment and we don't have the expertise to tell them, oh, $100,000 is worthwhile for Mamacita's Cafe in Hialeah.
Yeah.
That's not what we do. We review contracts.
Correct. Oftentimes what happens is they think that we are going to do everything and they just have to sit back and close.
No, we're the captain of the ship. We'll tell you need to get, and this is the worst thing possible. And in the past in another firm we were at, we had to file bankruptcy for a client because they didn't do their proper due diligence when they were purchasing the business.
Correct.
And specifically, there were emails, allegedly, that the law firm told them, you need to hire professionals. Because when we're representing somebody, when we're involved in the transaction, we tell them this is what we do, this is what we don't do.
Correct.
And if the things that we don't do, you need to hire professionals that do it.
Correct. So, I mean, really, again, we manage the legal, but you are in charge of your due diligence, and you have to meet certain time frames with that due diligence. So, you have to have a certain understanding of what you're doing when you're buying a business. And I think it's always good to, when you're considering this, come in, sit down, talk to the attorney, like face to face, so we can break down, this is what you need to go do, this is what you need to go find, and we are going to manage this and give them that breakdown of what we are going to do. Because a lot of times they say, oh, then why do I need an attorney if you're not going to do all of that? And I'm just we're protecting you.
We review all the legal documents and we protect you against yourself. That's one of the, especially when you're dealing with high-level entrepreneurs that think that they take risks. That's one of the reasons why historically lawyers are not great entrepreneurs or business people, because they try to talk themselves out of doing things. Yeah. And so I've said in the past,
they're not risk takers.
That's right. So oftentimes the legal mind is, don't do this because, and entrepreneurs are like, I'm going to do this and whatever happens, and I'll prepare for it. So oftentimes lawyers are butting heads with entrepreneurs. And I mean, one of the things that we pride ourselves on is we make deals. We don't break deals.
No.
But again, that being said, we aren't magicians, and we
Absolutely
can't predict the future. So ultimately, it's important not to just have us on board, but to have an accountant, ultimately a business valuation expert, somebody that has an expertise in inspecting if there's a lot of physical assets.
Yeah. So
to the
I think,
business.
the advice is, if you're planning to purchase a business, any type of purchase, have a team.
That's right.
You got to build a team to buy this and to run this and to make sure it's successful.
All right, enough of this legal talk. I'm getting a headache talking about all this legal stuff. Judge Janine, what about you? You awake?
I am. This is very interesting. And I didn't even think, you really do need a village to make a business decision like that as far as purchasing a business.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't even think about it. I'm like, oh, you like it, you talk to a realtor, you buy it. But no, it's not that simple.
No, and
Well,
then
if you
running
talk,
the business
if you
is even
talk,
more.
if you talk to a realtor, you'll buy it, and they'll say,
Yeah.
you don't want lawyers involved because lawyers kill deals. That's a fact.
Correct.
Both on the real estate and the business end. We've heard it all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Molto interessante.
So here's the ask an attorney anything question. It's very topical today,
Ooh,
and it's from Lincoln's Ghost.
Lincoln's Ghost.
Lincoln's Ghost wants to know, what top 5 things would you advise somebody when you're buying a business? And I'll start with you, Selena. Give us one of the 5.
Well, I just said it. Meet with your attorney. Meet with your attorney. It's the first thing. Bring, whatever documents, and explain to him, you want to buy a business, why you want to buy this business, how you think this business financially will benefit you, and take it from there. And then after you meet with your lawyer, go meet with your accountant.
Very good advice. Very good advice. The other thing that I would mention is that you need to, if it's a physical location,
Oh, yes.
you need to don't just buy something sight unseen.
Go see it.
Go see it, and then also talk with the people, the employees, because one of the other things, especially if you're dealing with a larger scale business that's dependent on others, not just dependent on the owner or the operator of the business, you also have to see, and we've seen it in action before. You want to see what the morale is of the employees.
Oh, yeah. Listen, there's nothing worse than you purchasing a business thinking that it's, everyone's going to stay on staff.
Right.
And then they all leave when you purchase the business, right? And it could be, a number of things. Maybe they really love the old employer, or maybe the morale was so low that they just didn't want to continue, because the assumption is the new buyer will be the same or worse. I'm going to add this. People don't understand sometimes that there's always, even though they may not be the owner, there's always that employee that makes the business. There's always that one that people just love.
That would be you. That would be you in Wallace Law.
People just love and they communicate with and they go to. And that, once that person is gone, I've seen it. I've seen it in firms where some people leave and then the business dies and no one knows why.
That's right.
And it's kind of like, well,
I mean, one of the things that we also see is the old guard. And they're like, we do it this way and no way else.
Flexibility.
And oftentimes if you have a new owner come in, there's new ideas. It's not the same way. So it's important when and we'll have another episode just talking about how to scale a business and how to have a successful business. We're need a guest on that one though, because we need some help on that.
We should name that one Meet the People.
Meet the People. Yes. And so culture and morale is something that you'll have no idea about when you're reviewing the balance sheets or anything of that nature.
No.
Judge Janine, you got some advice for somebody buying a business?
If they're buying a business, I would definitely recommend, are they buying the building or taking over the existing business and rebranding is my question.
It could be any of that. I mean, it could be, they're not buying a building. They're just taking over an existing space they don't own the real estate.
So I would definitely, in that case, ask for all the financials, all the accounting statements, and talk to a lawyer about that to see if it's a viable business to purchase.
Yeah. You know what the other thing I would say is, see if it's marketable.
Yeah.
Marketing, social media.
Mm-hmm.
That, you know.
It's important. I mean, everybody has their lives on social media. So, you know, a lot of businesses, the key asset is their Instagram account or their TikTok account.
Correct.
And you want to look at not just the positive comments, you want to look at the negative comments. Google reviews, Yelp reviews. I mean,
BBB.
right. Whenever I go to a restaurant, I'm always looking at how many stars. I'm reading the good comments and the bad comments, and it's really funny because you'll see like a very good restaurant. It's very rare you see a 5.0 for anything in Google.
Yeah.
And if you do, you kind of think to yourself, that doesn't make any sense because there's no way everybody's 100% of the time going to think it's the best thing. Oftentimes
It's
we'll
fake
see,
news.
Right.
Well,
See.
a lot of times, not to interrupt, but a lot of times if they have 5 stars, it's because they have 2 reviews and not 500 reviews.
Right.
That's true too.
Right.
The
Right,
amount of reviews is you have to look at.
Yeah.
That's what I do on Amazon.
Yeah. I generally won't buy anything on Amazon unless it's a Prime because oftentimes without it, like you may never get it. It's happened before because Hannah buys all these little things on Amazon and I'm like, it never comes. I mean, they give me my money back, but it's just a very interesting. So also, I mean, there's some businesses that their main asset is an Amazon store. We've seen that before too.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's very interesting. So as we wrap this up, you know, I don't like to stay all serious all the time.
Yeah.
Janine, you got any silly questions for us? Judge Janine, by the way, I'm sorry that I misled everybody without your title.
That's okay. I have a
Your honor.
You prompted something you just said earlier prompted a question actually.
Okay.
When you were saying look at the business's TikTok or their Instagram, if you buy a business, are you able to take their social media as well? Because if it's a one username, it's not like you can transfer it over. Like what happens in that instance? You have to start from scratch with the following?
Yeah, you just get the password.
You're buying the intellectual property.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, especially if we know that's a major asset to it, we put language in there, and it's oftentimes it's a post-closing requirement where they exchange the username and the password and they transfer it over to you. I mean, the IG handle or the TikTok handle is worth oftentimes millions of dollars.
But how do you transfer that? It's assigned to a person's account through their Facebook account.
You can. You're the tech wizard here. I mean, you just go in and transfer the owner of the account from one to another. We do that with our multiple IG accounts. Like I'll let her run some of the IG accounts that we have.
Yeah. So it's very easy. It's just going in there. Yeah. And you're just changing everything.
Yeah. Don't
but
listen.
You still own the handle.
Right. Don't listen to anybody that say, "Oh, I can't transfer the handle because it's associated with my Facebook account." Yeah. That's gobbledygook nonsense.
Yeah.
Good to know. So you have to state that though, that you're buying all the intellectual property of that business.
Well, your attorney will put it all together.
Right. And I will do, when it comes to a business that has a lot of intellectual property, then I will have a schedule and I'll itemize what the IG account, and I'll put the specific handles.
IG and Facebook.
Right. And all the different websites.
And on Facebook, it's a Facebook page. Mm-hmm. So, it's a separate page, essentially.
Yep.
Because it's a business page, you're able to assign it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can also separate, like if they do it as a personal one, you can also separate that too and just provide them the usernames for it, and you can separate it from your own personal accounts.
Yeah.
Interesting. Good to know.
We live and we learn.
That's why someone needs an attorney though, because if someone has 50 or 60,000 followers on Instagram and they're not writing that up in the intellectual property document, then...
See, it's catchy.
That's right. It is. That's so interesting. Okay. Judge Janine out. That was amazing.
Okay, I want to close us out with a silly question. We've eliminated the lightning round, but that doesn't mean that I can't ask silly questions.
Uh-oh.
In the past week, what song have you been listening to in the car?
Oh, that's easy peasy. Because,
Okay.
baby, you're a firework. Yeah.
Okay.
Katy Perry.
Okay. Hannah and I have been playing out Pink Pony Club beyond
Oh.
belief.
Okay.
Except
okay.
I'm like I'm not telling you the meaning behind that song, Hannah.
Or where Pink Pony is.
That's right. Judge Janine.
I have been listening to a lot of Busta Rhymes. Put your hands where my eyes can see. It's
Okay.
been
Oh,
on
wow.
my playlist because
Brought it back.
I love me some Busta Rhymes.
So
Okay.
So in closing, what did we learn today? What did you learn today, Selena?
I learned, for me personally, if I were to buy a business, I would like to own the real estate.
Okay, good.
But that's just for me personally. It's that personal choice. But I also like to own real estate because
You
I
do.
don't know. It's just
You do.
like I just the thought of paying rent just drives me bananas.
Well, just to remind you, I got a lot of hate for the following comment that I said before, and this goes along your lines to a degree. I don't understand how lawyers don't own real estate. I'm not getting a lot of love for that statement, but I'm standing by it.
Well,
How are you a lawyer and you're advising people on successes or how to get them money for the most part?
well, here's the thing. It's not for everyone.
But how do you not own real? How can you tell somebody?
Because it does come with a lot of headaches. So some people just prefer to pay rent and not have to worry about, oh, I have a roof leak or I have this.
But you have nothing to
have
show
that.
for. There's nothing other than you're making. You know what you're making? Because you're a landlord. You're paying your landlord's mortgage for them. You're paying the landlord's taxes for them. You're paying the landlord's insurance from them, and you're making the landlord rich.
Yes.
That's what I have to.
But some
that's what-
people see it the opposite way. Yes, they're paying for all of that, but they have peace of mind. And that is worth more to them.
Okay, interesting.
So it's not for everyone.
Janine, what did you learn today? Judge Janine, sorry. I stand corrected.
I learned about intellectual property and how important it is to hire a team of people to assist you. And I agree with Selena about purchasing the building and owning the building. I think that as a real estate attorney, it's like me not having a podcast as a podcast producer. If you're a real estate attorney, I think you should own the property so you can advise your clients on your own performance with how you acquired the building, a business, etc.
Very good. Very good. I didn't learn anything because I'm just a genius. You just need to hire you just need to hire Wallace Law, and I'll answer all your questions.
Stephen learned that not everyone needs real estate.
What I've learned is maybe I should be more humble. That's what I've learned today. We out.
Thank you for listening to Attorneys Are Human Too. Remember, give us a 5-star review and follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and wherever you get your digital content.